I'm John Bond. Welcome to Move Yourself Happy. Made for fitness enthusiasts who want to make their passion their profession. Are you unhappy in your present job? Are you passionate about health and fitness? Do you want to release your true potential? If the answer is yes, this podcast is for you. I will be teaching you the specific knowledge that every trainer and coach needs to be successful. So listen closely as I share my expertise with you. So just like me, you can love what you do. Welcome back. In the last episode, I was discussing muscular endurance, and today we're going to be talking about hypertrophy. And in this episode, I'm going to cover what is hypertrophy, what are the benefits, and how can personal trainers and coaches program to enhance hypertrophy in their clients and in themselves as well. So let's begin. What is hypertrophy? Well, first of all, you'll hear it pronounced in different ways. People often say hypertrophy. I say hypertrophy. I think one's probably American, one's probably English. I wouldn't worry about it. Say it however you like. What does it actually mean? Well, it refers to the growth of muscle tissue. So when we put tension on our muscles, one of the adaptations is they grow. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, already I kind of want to switch off because I'm not really interested in growing larger muscles, then I do urge you to keep listening because there might be some surprising benefits that you weren't aware of. So, as I said, hypertrophy is the increase in muscle size. Now I don't want to get too technical because it gets a bit sciencey, a bit boring, but our understanding with muscle is it grows in two different ways, and they actually do that simultaneously, so it's not like there's two separate processes, they do it together. Now within a muscle fibre, if you zoom in super close under a microscope, you'll see that we've got something within them called myofilaments, actin and myosin. And when we train, people often talk about training to damage the muscle tissue so that it repairs thicker and stronger. That's what we're doing. We're damaging those myofilaments so they do repair, but then we send satellite cells down to the damaged area, we lay down more cells, so then what happens is overall the muscle becomes thicker. And this is a good thing, this is what we want, because thicker muscles produce more force. And I'll talk about the benefits of more in a second. So that's one way. Now, if you have more active myofilaments, then they require more energy. So within the muscle, we also have something called sarcoplasm, which is kind of like the storage of energy substrates, really. So if you've got thicker muscles, they require more energy, so you get more sarcoplasm. And sarcoplasm kind of fills the spaces within a muscle, so it will increase the muscle size that way. So the two areas really where your muscle's getting larger is increased thickness and number of myofilaments, and then the increased sarcoplasm around that. So that's how it grows. What are the benefits? Well, like I said, the obvious one is larger muscles produce more force. So it's one of the influencing factors of strength. Generally, large or more muscular people produce more force, they're stronger. So that's useful. But when we're growing muscle, one of the things that we also get along with the growth of muscle is we get an increase in thickness of our connective tissue, so ligaments that join bone to bone. So when we're putting our musculoskeletal system under stress and tension, it's not just the muscles that are getting the stress and the tension, it's also those connective tissues, so they will also adapt. So thicker ligaments that connect bone to bone and support joints in the body, if they're more robust and thicker, then that reduces injury risk. So we have a more robust skeleton from that point of view. We also increase our bone density. So within the bones, we've got all these minerals, bone minerals. When we put pressure through the bone with a good nutritious diet as well, then what happens is we lay down more bone cells. So we have something called osteoblasts that build more bone cells, and the bones become thicker and denser. So they're less likely to fracture and break, etc. when we fall over or we connect with other people in contact sports. So think about that from, we've got an athletic point of view, but then we've also got a health point of view. So from a health point of view, as we get older, our bones will naturally lose their density and our muscles will naturally atrophy, which is the opposite to hypertrophy. But what we can do to counter that is resistance training, and specifically a phase of hypertrophy training would be great. By the way, this isn't the only phase where you can increase muscle size. So it's not a case of, you're working on muscle endurance, all that does is build endurance, then you switch into hypertrophy and all you do is build muscle size. It doesn't quite work like that. The different phases are just are better and more suitable for optimal muscle endurance or optimal hypertrophy or optimal strength. So that's how the phases work. So what I'm discussing is optimal for hypertrophy. So as we're getting older, we don't want our muscles to atrophy because we lose function. Our metabolism gets lower, which means it's easier for us to store body fat. And we find that our bones lose their density, and that in the early days we call that osteopenia, but if that becomes quite bad, then we have what's called osteoporosis, which is not a good thing. If you're falling over, you're going to break bones really easily. So we want to avoid that. Very painful. And then also, we mentioned ligaments, but also we've got tendons that connect muscle to bone, and they'll get thicker as well. So think about all the different connective tissues, everything that makes a good, strong, robust, muscular, skeletal system. Well, a hypertrophy phase of training is going to be wonderful for improving that. Now, in strength and conditioning, we often refer to the hypertrophy phase as armor building. I quite like that as well. Rather than it being that sort of emphasis on it's just about building muscle. Now, obviously, bodybuilders, they'll spend a lot of time in this phase of training because that's what when they're on stage and they're being judged by judges, that's what they're scored on: the size, the symmetry, the aesthetics, obviously the leanness as well and everything else. But that's very important, building muscle. But when we look at it from a athletic point of view, a performance point of view, you're building armor. So when you're whacking on thick, dense muscle, that comes with all those strong connective tissues, which means you're less likely to get injured. The longevity of your sport is going to be improved. Particularly if you're in a contact sport like rugby, even like sports where it's not really meant to be contact, but it happens, basketball, hockey, netball, there is going to be times where you come in contact with an opponent, and if it's hard, you're high velocity, people get injured, they get hurt, and thicker muscles, thicker connective tissues mean you're going to be much better at coping with that. So there's a big plus to hypertrophy from a performance point of view: increased strength, increased robustness. And then if you think about also just from a survival point of view, now when I did my masters, one of my assignments, we had to choose an athlete and we had to design a test battery. So we had to research the athlete, design a test battery that would assess that athlete in relation to their sport. So we would work out all the different components of fitness that would be very, very helpful for that athlete, assess where they are now, compare that to where they should be, and then write a program to kind of fill the gaps basically. And I chose tactical athletes just because it's not something that I suppose I'd always been interested in it, but I thought, well, I don't want to choose something that I've got a lot of research, got a lot of knowledge and understanding in already. So I chose something a little bit off the wall, and I chose tactical athletes, which is like an umbrella term for law enforcement people, even the fire service, but mainly military, really, people that work in the military. And all the stuff that I read, I stumbled upon some research that showed that if people, and this isn't going to be groundbreaking, you're going to listen to this and go, well, of course. But it was great to see the research and have that kind of reinforced. But there was a ton of research that showed that if somebody looks physically strong and has presence, they are a harder target for people that might want to attack them. Now, the one study I looked at was prison guards. So prison guards, there's an inverse correlation between the number of attacks upon a prison guard and the size and the sort of stature of the prison guard, which basically means the more of a unit you are as a prison guard, the less likely you are to get attacked by the inmates. Now, again, probably thinking, well, this is pretty obvious, John, surely. But we make assumptions about things, but it's then nice to have that data to reinforce it. Anyway, I read some other stuff that looked at people that were, they interviewed people that were in prison, and they talked to people that snatch people's bags, mug people that mugged people, just attackers in general. And I'm probably butchering this, but this is my conclusion from it. They obviously choose their targets carefully. So if they're going to steal someone's bag, they're going to choose someone that looks like they can't, for a start, run after them. And if they did run after them, if they caught them, they're not going to get hurt by that person. So just looking like you can handle yourself, you can run, and you can fight potentially, does keep you a bit safer. So there is something to consider there for both men and women. Is a bit of lean muscle mass does give you a bit of presence and does make you a harder target. So I do think that's something to consider. It certainly resonated with me. So that's something to factor in there as a benefit. So we've got definitely increased performance for specific sports. And also don't forget, like sometimes people think, oh, I don't want to get bigger because if I get bigger, I'm going to get slower in my sport. But it's about your body composition. If you increase your functional mass and you reduce your non-functional mass, you can be the same weight. So you just recomposition your body. So if you're 90 kilos, and for whatever sport you play, say it is basketball, 90 kilos is a good weight for you. And you've done the research, and you actually that's typically a really good sort of average weight for a basketball player. I'm just chucking random numbers out there now. Now, of that 90 kilos, you want to use up the majority of that 90 kilos with a good, dense, robust skeleton and muscle mass. You don't want excess body fat that is non-functional. All that body fat is doing is giving you energy. Well, you don't need that in a basketball game. You're going to have that floating around in your muscles and your liver and your blood. So you don't want excess body fat weighing you down that's not functional. So you want to burn off that fat and replace that with hard, lean, dense muscle. So just consider that. If you're scared of building muscle because you don't want to get heavier, just ask yourself the question, have you got some unwanted body fat that you could replace with some lean muscle? So that'd be my advice there. So benefits, I think I've covered them. You're going to get stronger. You're going to have a denser, more robust musculoskeletal system overall, which is obviously going to reduce your injury risk when you're playing sports. If you are just considering health and you don't really care about performance, then if you do fall over in any situation, you're less likely to break bones and damage joints and tear muscles, etc. You're going to have more presence. You're going to be a harder target for any would-be predator out there. That's pretty much it, isn't it? Okay, great. So I've talked about the benefits. Let's move on to how do we actually program for our clients. Now, as I said previously, it's not that any other type of phase of training isn't going to get some sort of hypertrophy effect on a client, because it will. I mean, there's data out there that shows actually people can increase muscle mass even doing, I think, reps up to something like 50. If you look at cyclists, their calf muscles are generally pretty big, and there's definitely some hypertrophy happen there. And we would argue, well, that's not in the hypertrophy phase if they're doing higher reps on a bike. So it is still possible to get hypertrophy from other phases of training. However, as I said, we're talking about optimal phases. And during the optimal phase of hypertrophy training, we're looking at reps in the 6 to 12 rep range, ideally. So if you're on a barbell bench press, you're looking at doing 6 reps, 8, 10 or 12 of those. And I would say probably more towards the higher end of that, because something else that is important is time under tension. So time under tension is how long those muscles are under tension for, usually recorded in seconds. And anything from sort of 30 to 60 seconds seems to be pretty good. So if you're doing 10 reps and it takes you about 3 seconds to do each repetition, that total time under tension is 30 seconds. Now this is quite important to take note of, actually, because generally clients, not just clients, but us as trainers and coaches, we like to smash out our reps as quickly as possible. We just want to get it done. And what happens is, if you time it, the set will be 10 or 15 seconds because you've bashed it out so quick, and that is not optimal for muscle growth. There isn't enough tension there to trigger that growth. So we do need to think about that if we really want our muscles to grow. So what you can do is you can prescribe tempos to counter this. So for example, another sort of belief in the strength and conditioning world is that the negative phase or the eccentric phase of a repetition, which is where your muscles are under tension but getting longer. So think about lowering a barbell during a barbell bench press. During that phase, we believe that that is actually the most significant portion of the lift for triggering muscle growth. So what you can do is you can slow that bit down. So as you're bringing that bar down towards you, you could do that for 4 seconds. So you're going down, 2, 3, 4, then push up. Now, if you add that up, 4 seconds down, second going up, that's 5 seconds. If you're doing 10 reps, that's 50 seconds for the set. That's a time under tension of 50 seconds. So I don't want you guys to get confused or find this like we're overcomplicating things. All I would just bear in mind is that if you're flying through the sets very quickly, there might not be enough tension there to get optimal growth. So think about slowing the eccentric part of the exercise down. So that's something that you can certainly consider. So we've got the reps 6 to 12, probably towards the 10, 12 reps just to keep that tension higher. You've also got your sets. So it's probably between 3 to 6 sets. Now, Brad Schoenfeld, so he's a good guy to look into. Google him if you've not heard of him before, but he's a natural bodybuilder, or used to be a natural bodybuilder, and he's also, his PhD is basically in hypertrophy. So he is the kind of go-to person when it comes to all the data and research for building muscle. And he suggested, I read in some of his, I've got a few of his books, but one of them he suggests in there about getting at least sort of 10 sets per muscle group per week to get some growth, and actually even up to 20 for those more advanced lifters. So what that could look like is if you're training a client 3 times a week, if you're hitting their chest for 4 sets on a Monday, 4 sets on a Wednesday, and then 4 sets on a Friday, add that up, that's 12 sets. So it could look something like that. So think about that. So typically with hypertrophy style training or bodybuilding type training, we program with muscles. Don't have to, you can still think about movements like pushes and pulls, that's fine, but often we will think about muscles. So hitting the chest 3 times a week, minimum 4 sets per session, deltoids, back, etc. And so that's a really good, I think that's a really good sort of standard, is to think about that. And you don't have to go straight in there with 4 sets. You can start with 2 sets, and then you'll just progress your client over time. And if if they're saying that I'm not building enough muscle, I'm not really happy with the rate of muscle growth, then you would go from there. You go, well, we're only doing 2 at the moment. Let's progress to 3. There's other factors which I'll talk about in a sec as well that will influence growth. So we're going 6 to 12 reps, 3 to 6 sets. Ideally, if you're doing 3 times a week, probably 4. We've talked about time under tension, 30 to 60 seconds. Rest periods, for the big muscle groups, you might be wanting to rest for as long as 2 minutes, maybe 90 seconds. And then for the smaller muscle groups like biceps, 30 seconds is probably enough. So that range, if you read a manual on this sort of thing, it will say 1 to 2 minutes rest between. But like I said, for very small muscle groups, you can probably get away with 30 seconds. And we want to be going where we don't really feel completely ready, because we're trying to stress the muscles. We're trying to go when they're like still recovering, because we want to get that microscopic damage and tear, so they get the muscles go, oh blimey, this is tough. If I'm going to be getting this regularly, I better lay down a few more extra myofilaments and build thicker muscle to cope with this level of attention on this volume and this frequency. Don't forget, progressive overload is all about subjecting your muscles to a stress they're not accustomed to gradually over time, so they do adapt. So there we go. So I think I've covered those sort of requirements for building muscle from a programming perspective. I suppose I could talk about split routines. So split routines, we often get a bit bogged down with breaking muscles up into like chest and triceps, back and biceps, shoulders and legs, that type of split. Now there is a downside. If someone's training 3 times a week, if you break it up per muscle like that, it's a whole week until you're training those muscles again. So it is quite a long time. So I personally wouldn't do that. Like, I did that back in the day when I first started, and it's a fun way to train, just focusing on a couple of muscles per training session. But I would argue it's certainly not optimal, because you're only hitting chest once a week if you're doing it on a Monday. You're only hitting shoulders once a week if you're doing it on a Wednesday, etc. So definitely try to avoid that. Now, if you're only training 3 times a week, I still go with the total body approach. It's effective. I would argue it is the single best way to train, because you're hitting those muscles 3 times a week. Great frequency of training. Now, if you're training 4 times a week, you can actually still do that, even though people go, oh, but what about the 48 hours rest between hitting those muscle groups? It's largely a myth. You don't necessarily need to do that. You can try that out with yourself or with clients, see how you recover. But you can do that total body workout 4 times a week if you want. If you prefer not to, then yeah, maybe go upper lower split. And if you go upper lower split, Monday upper body, Tuesday lower body, Wednesday off, Thursday upper body, Friday lower body, weekend off. That works really well, but still remember you're hitting those muscles now just twice a week as opposed to 3 times a week. Still effective, but perhaps not as effective as hitting things 3 times a week. So that's how you can do the splits. There's various other splits, but they tend to be my go-to ones, to be fair. I think they're the most effective. And then we need to really talk about, what about all the other factors? So I mentioned training, but if you're writing programs for your clients and they're really serious about their muscles growing, there are other factors that come into play, and you are going to have to give them advice on that. And one of the biggies, which I think is probably overlooked, is sleep. So when we're asleep, that is when the majority of our repair processes take place. So when you're training, you're not growing. You're breaking down when you're training. It's when you're sleeping that you're growing. So for those people that are really serious about muscle growth, not just muscle growth actually, but just recovering from workouts in general, even like endurance athletes, really take your sleep seriously, because the longer you sleep and the better quality of your sleep, the more you repair, the better gains you're going to get. So make sleep certainly a priority, and then that will trigger all the other things that affect your sleep. So if you do drink a lot, well, for a start, drinking does reduce your testosterone levels, which is a very, very significant hormone for building muscle. So if you're a big drinker, definitely try and nip that in the bud, because that's going to counter your goals big time. But that's also going to affect your sleep. So you will not sleep, your quality of sleep is not going to be as good if you're drinking. So definitely sort that out. And think about anything else you might do that's going to affect your quality of sleep. So if you're one of those people that plays with your phone late at night, so you're quite wired, you've got that blue light stimulating you, you're just not going to sleep as deeply. So, I could do a whole podcast on sleep, but there's experts out there, and if you do a bit of Googling, do a bit of research, they'll give you all the tips for sleep. In fact, the NHS website has some fantastic tips on sleep. You probably already know them. Make sure your environment is set up for good sleep. Blackout curtains, remove all technology, remove all fake lighting, have a routine, go to bed at the same time every night, get up at the same time every morning. That is the one thing, well, I say the one thing, I was about to say, that's one thing that I do right. I do more than just one thing right, but that is certainly something that I guess I pride myself on, is at the weekends, whatever, like even if I have a slightly later night than I normally do, I will still get up early at my regular time, because I don't want to affect my sleeping patterns. So, and that's something that I strongly encourage. So sleep's obviously really important. Nutrition, now protein gets talked about a lot when we talk about muscle building, and I've spoken about it before in webinars, and I've written blogs on it. And really all I'm doing is regurgitating research that's out there, or things that the National Strength and Conditioning Association are putting out there. But there's some really interesting stuff just recently where, I won't go into massive detail, but check out the Zoe podcast, because they've been sort of suggesting that protein has been completely overestimated for everybody. and actually we can all do perfectly fine with a lot less. The last year, my protein intake has been considerably lower than it ever has been, and I don't feel any different. So protein is important, but if you're eating good quality food, you will be getting good proteins. So my advice to anyone who really wants to build muscle as far as nutrition goes is really think about the quality of the food you're eating. Single ingredient foods, unrefined, avoid that ultra processed stuff, fibrous fruit and vegetables, whole grains, beans, all that stuff. That is going to be far better for you, because not only are you going to get all the great fibre, which is going to be great for your gut bacteria, which is going to prime your body for recovery and repair and rebuild better, you're also going to get all the vitamins and minerals in there, which again, you know, they're going to contribute to loads of great stuff, like making enzymes to speed up chemical reactions in your body that again help you repair and rebuild much better. So your go-to focus for nutrition is good quality food and avoiding crap food and alcohol intake. Now, the other thing I guess we can't get around is our genetic makeup. And people all try and cheat this with obviously performance enhancing substances, etc., i.e., you know, steroids, injecting synthetic hormones into their body. Don't recommend that. I'm not an expert in it. I'm not going to go into details about the whys and hows, etc. But I wouldn't recommend it. I think from a psychological point of view, it's far better to just accept that you can only control the controllables. So like, think about what you've been given and use that to the best of your ability and accept that. I'm saying this now, maybe I'll feel differently when I'm 60 and I can see my PBs dropping like you can't believe, and maybe I will go to the doctor and see if I can get tested for low T levels and see what I can get. But at the moment, as a 44-year-old man, I'm okay with the fact that some of my numbers are dropping now as I'm getting older, and it's hard to hit what I could before. But I think genetically, it's just important to use what you've got, really. And we can all build muscle, doesn't matter who you are. You know, I've had clients where I can't build muscle. And then I'll train them and they'll build muscle and they'll be like, oh, wow, you know, and they'll think I've done something magical. And all I've done is kept them consistently training. So in their head, they're like, oh, I train loads, but, you know, I never get the results. And actually, they haven't been training as much as they thought they had. And when they train with me, when they train consistently 3 times a week, and I have a cancellation policy, which means if they text me that morning saying they can't make the session, they still pay for it. It means they keep coming and they get gains. So usually with a lot of people, they're going, oh, I'm not growing. But if they're honest with themselves, they just haven't been consistent. 3 times a week, stay the course, trust the process. In the great words of Dave Hall, trust the process. So that's obviously really important. Okay, so I've covered nutrition, sleep, obviously avoiding alcohol, genetics are important. Obviously you can't modify those, but just accept what genes you have and use them to the best of your ability. I think that's pretty much it, isn't it? So just to recap, to make your muscles grow, we want to make sure we're in the reps of 6 to 12 rep range, 3 to 6 sets. Make sure the time under tension is 30 to 60 seconds. Volume beats intensity, in my opinion. So you're better off trying to progress your volume than lifting heavier and harder and harder. I like a total body workout 3 times a week, or an upper lower split 4 times a week. You could try. We've also got the benefits of hypertrophy are improved sports performance, greater force production, more robust skeleton, less likely to get injured. You avoid muscle sarcopenia, which is muscles getting smaller as you get older, osteoporosis, which is your bones degenerating as you get older, less likely to hurt yourself or fall over, loads of good stuff. Oh, and obviously, I mean, this occurs with every phase, but with every phase of training, when you're doing those movements and you're focusing on different muscles, you will build coordination, which helps with balance and you're less likely to fall over as you're getting older. All right, there we go, hypertrophy. So hopefully I covered everything that you kind of want to know then. You've learned something. Next episode, I'm going to actually talk about functional hypertrophy. So I'm just going to talk about how can we make the muscles that we're growing a little bit more functional. And I know this word functional gets thrown around a lot. It's a little bit of a buzzword. It's a bit trendy. Well, it certainly was. I think it's becoming a bit more understood now. But just thinking about giving somebody a program where they can still have a bit of an emphasis on muscle building, but also building some strength and doing that in a way that's functional. Hope you enjoyed that. See you next time. Now, if you enjoyed today's episode, something you can do for me is subscribe to my show. And if you know anyone else that might be interested in this content, then please share it with them too. You can also head over to our socials and follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook and YouTube. But if you're ready to take that next step, visit our website, www.stormfitnessacademy.co.uk, fill out a contact form, that'll come straight to me. I will contact you shortly afterwards, and I look forward to speaking to you then.